Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of FEHology, the study of Fire Emblem heroes. I'm Memento Mori, and I'll be your FEHologist for today. So this episode is going to be the second in the little series that I'm doing that aims to provide a retrospective on every single seasonal weapon that has been released in Feh. And today I'll be going over all of the weapons that came out in 2018. I'd say the weapons in this year start getting better, and even though, of course, they aren't on the level of the weapons that came out in 2020 or are coming out this year, where basically every single weapon has a build that can make very good use of it. I'd say some of these weapons in the latter half of the year are still useful today, and we're getting there, basically. So in February of 2018, we got the Lava Bounce banner. The weapon effect is if foe uses bow, dagger, magic, or staff, neutralizes foes' bonuses from skills like Fortify or Rally during combat. This came as a lance on Eddiewood, a bow on Roy, a blue tome on Lyn, and a green tome on Alina. These weapons are basically the B skill dull range on the weapon, and of course that skill is fine. I'd say being able to neutralize visible buffs, all visible buffs for a specific type of unit is fine, but I really don't think that this skill is really that necessary. I think people used to use the Casablanca, which is Eddiewood's lance on Donald before he got his refine, but I really don't understand that because especially now when the meta has kind of shifted away from visible buffs with things like Panic Smoke on Frazier or Panic Manner in AR, there really isn't that many situations where you'll be going up against an enemy with a extremely large amount of visible buffs, unless they are a Blade Tome, of course, and then these weapons just cancel that basically. And I'd still say these weapons can be pretty well utilized on any type of range tank because they do not need a distant counter in the A slot. So if you stack distant defense on the A and S slot, they can be very good against range units in the enemy phase. But of course, I think you also have to consider that I'm pretty sure distant defense 4 also clears away all visible buffs. So I still don't think these weapons are that necessary. So I'd give them a 5 out of 10. I'd say these weapons are quite useful for combative purposes, but they are quite specialized and will require you to have a specific build in mind. In March of 2018, we got the Hairs at the Fair banner, and the weapon effect is that it deals plus 10 damage when special triggers. This came as an axe on Alphonse and a dagger on Kagero. This is the wall down effect on a weapon, which I would say is of course pretty useful because if you combo it with things like Noontime or Soul, you are able to heal more or just deal more damage straight out. But I think that because it is the wall down effect, we already have alternatives in the normal pool. The Mogan Accent, I'm pretty sure, exists on Libra, so there is basically no use for the Giant Spoon from Alphonse unless you really like how it looks. And although there is no walled out dagger, making Kagero's weapon quite unique, I still don't think walled out is the most useful effect on the dagger anyway, because in the majority of cases, daggers kind of act as a more support role. You want to debuff your enemy in order so that your teammates can deal more damage, and I'm not sure that having a walled out effect is really conducive towards that. So I'd give these weapons a 3 out of 10. Because Alphonse's weapon is already extremely easily accessible, there's no need to specifically pull for him. And having the ward out effect on a dagger is not the most useful anyway. In the same month, March of 2018, we got the Bridal Bloom banner. And the weapon effect is that if at start of turn, if unit is adjacent to an ally, grant stat plus 4 to units and adjacent allies for 1 turn. So this came as an axe on Marth that gave plus attack, and a blue tome on Ninian that boosted speed. And what is interesting about these weapons is that they're basically a slightly worse version of the joint hone skills, which only came out at the beginning of 2019. And that is very interesting since we don't really see weapons that have effects that predate some more premium skills coming out, but I'd still say the joint hone skills aren't exactly amazing. Of course, they are tier 4C skills, and so they help you score, but the stat boost, especially for these weapons, having +4 to only 1 stat from a weapon is quite low. And also, as I said just now, visible buffs probably aren't that important in the current meta. I'd also say that their requirement that you be adjacent to someone else is also quite harsh, especially since you need to get all of your units into position before the start of your next turn in order to get maximum benefits. But nonetheless, I'd still say there are some build options where you want team compositions that want all of your units to stay together, like armor balls, flyer balls, if anyone still uses them anymore. And of course, you can also pair them with other joint hone skills in the C slot in order to get even more buffs this way. And so I'd give these weapons a 6 out of 10. I'd say they are unique and interesting for both supporting your allies and boosting the units that they are equipped on, but they still probably aren't the best options. In June of 2018, we got the Summer's Arrival banner. And the weapon effect is that if unit initiates combat, grants attack, speed, defense, res +2 during combat. This came as a lance on Cordelia, an axe on Innis, and a bow on Noir. These are Spectrum Blow skills, which I would say are analogous to the Christmas weapons of 2017, which were Spectrum Stand skills. And I would say that similar to those weapons, these aren't really that good because they are firstly only useful in one turn, and secondly the stat boost of giving everything +2 really isn't that good. And so yeah, there isn't really much to talk about here. Any player phase unit who has balanced stats will probably could use them, but I'd still give them a 4 out of 10, which is the same ranking as the 2017 Christmas weapons, because they really are similar and they are really kind of bad in a similar way. In July of 2018, we got a Sketchy Summer banner, and the weapon effect is if unit's HP is lower than or equal to 75% and unit initiates combat, unit can make a follow-up attack before foe can counterattack. This came as a bow on Takumi, a dagger on Lind, and a blue tome on Camilla. This is the B skill Desperation on a weapon, and I would say they are incredibly useful because Desperation is such a useful skill that basically any offensive unit would want, and this also frees up the B slot for lull skills, which would help boost your units even further. And I'd say having such a competitive skill directly on a weapon makes these some of the best seasonal inheritable weapons, because if you look at like Young Marv, this isn't really a good comparison, but his rapier comes in with a built-in vantage effect, and because his weapon has that vantage effect, it frees up the B slot for Young Marv to run Special Spiral, which helps compound his offensive capabilities with a special even better. And that is why I'd say for all of these inheritable weapons that basically just come with a skill, the thing you need to consider is how competitive that skill itself is. So, like I talked about just now with the Valentine's weapons, which were double range, that wasn't really that competitive of a skill, and so having that on the weapon doesn't help that much. But I'd say having Desperation, it can work on basically any unit that is fast enough to double and can be run with maybe Brazen skills in the A and Seal slot just in order to boost your stats to even crazier levels. And yeah, I'd say these weapons are probably some of the best and most useful seasonal weapons that have come out in this game. And I'd say as long as Desperation remains in fashions, these weapons will always be great options for any offensive unit. And I'd give them a 8 out of 10. In August of 2018, we got the Festival in Hoshido banner, and the weapon effect is that these weapons are effective against a specific type of unit, and disables units and foe skills that change attack priority. These were all daggers, but they differ in the type of unit that they are effective against. Elincia's is effective against dragons, Ryoma is effective against armors, and Xander's is effective against cavalry. I'd say having the 1.5 times effective damage is always useful, and the good thing about these weapons, I'd say the best thing about these weapons, is that essentially you can pick and choose which units you want to be effective against, because all three of these weapons have been or are available as combat manuals in the game. I think Ryoma got an ephemera manual like half a year ago, and Elincia and Xander are both in the normal combat manual paths. The accessibility of these weapons really helps them, and it also helps you to not actually have to spend any orbs and be able to have these weapons. I'd say what makes them so useful, aside from the effective damage, is the hardy bearing effect, because of course if you've played AR for any decent amount of time, you know how important hardy bearing is to counter vantage strategies. I'd say in the current meta you'd probably need more than one hardy bearing unit, because with monsters like Winter Altina, the enemy could probably rush in, snipe your hardy bearing unit if you only have one, and plonk your entire team. But if you have more than one unit with hardy bearing, it helps really counter those vantage strategies, and I'd say that's what also gives these weapons an extra utility. But I'd say still keep in mind that these are daggers, and dagger units really aren't the best class of units in Feh, and so I'd give these a 7 out of 10. Even though they give you a lot of utility in AR with the hardy bearing, as well as doing potentially lots of damage with the effectiveness, the fact that you're forced to run them on a dagger unit really kind of hinders these weapons from reaching even higher heights. In October of 2018, we got the Land's Bounty, and the weapon effect is that inflicts special cooldown charge -1 on foe per attack during combat. This came as an axe on Dorcas, a bow on Niles, and a dagger on Kagro. So this is basically guard on a weapon. I'd say it is very useful because it allows units to be tankier as well as avoid an enemy special proc, and it also works better than the guard B skill because that B skill has a very high HP requirement if I remember correctly, and falling out of that basically after a couple of combats is extremely easy, and then you lose that effect. But because these weapons don't have any type of HP threshold in order to activate their effect, I'd say that makes them probably even better than that skill. And even though Guard Axe already exists in the normal pull, there isn't really a bow or a dagger that gives the guard effect. I'd say that also gives these weapons an extra niche for ranged tanks, because those usually don't have such an option in the weapon, and I'd say any kind of defensive unit that is meant to tank will make use of these weapons very well. And I'd give these weapons a 6 out of 10, basically since guard is a useful but not spectacular skill, that basically makes these weapons useful but not spectacular as well. But there was also an outlier in this banner, which is the Witchy 1 plus on Mia, and the effect is extremely long, so bear with me. After combat, if unit attacked, resets the special cooldown of target and foes within 2 spaces of target, and inflicts the following status on target and foes within 2 spaces of target for their next actions. Inflict special cooldown charge -1 per attack during combat. Only highest value applied, does not stack. I'd say this is an insanely good effect that really can't be countered by any sort of really can't be countered by any unit except the creator sword on the bailiffs, and it is kind of a better pulse smoke because it, aside from carrying because pulse smoke only increases the special cooldown by 1, but this just straight up resets all special cooldowns and inflicts guard. This gives this weapon extremely high utility in kind of just dismantling infantry pulse teams in AR, but also keep in mind that the Melancholy plus staff on Silk exists, and that is the exact same effect, but it is in the normal pool instead of the seasonal pool. I'd still give the Witchy Wand an 8 out of 10, simply because it is probably one of the best inheritable staffs in the game period, and being able to just straight up reset the special cooldown really gives it a unique niche that other staffs or weapons can't even fill. And in December of 2018, we got the Gifts of Winter Banner. And the weapon effect is, during combat, boost units' defense res by number of allies within 2 spaces times 2, with a maximum bonus of +6 to each stat. This came as a dagger on Cecilia and a Dragonstone on Faye. A +6 defensive stat boost is very good, I'd say, especially since this applies to both phases. It doesn't require you to be the one initiating attack on the enemy or being initiated upon. You'd want to use this in team compositions that basically want to stay near each other, like armor balls, because Cecilia and Faye themselves are already armor units. I'd say they also synergize very well with the form skills in the A slot. I know no one really uses them, but since these weapons require you to have 3 allies within 2 spaces anyway, why not just combo that with the form skills in order to get +7 to 2 stats as well? I'd say you could also potentially run these with bond skills or the unity skills, since those also require you to stick close to your allies. And so yeah, I'd give these a 7 out of 10. I'd say they are very good for defensive units in both phases, but simply requiring you to be near all 3 of your allies in order to get maximum benefits is still kind of a harsh condition in my opinion. And we also had an outlier on this banner, which was the Joyous Lantern Plus on Erica. It grants defense res +5 to ally with the highest attack for 1 turn, excludes units. This staff is very good for team support. I'd say it would help improve the defensive capabilities of your strongest unit. Of course, that makes it pair very well with attack opening on Erica, because that gives attack +6 to the ally with the highest attack. But I'd still say there are definitely better staffs in general, because again, visible buffs. Yeah, and also the fact that there are other types of support that staffs can give their allies that are basically better than only granting this visible buff to 1 ally. I'd give this a 6 out of 10. It really isn't anything that spectacular, but I'd still say it's kind of useful. And so thank you all for listening. This is all of the weapons that came out, all of the seasonal weapons that came out in 2018. And if you'd like to reach out to the show, you can do so through our subreddit of r/FEHology, or email the show directly at FEHology@gmail.com if people still use Gmail for communication anyway. If you'd like to chat, you can also do so by joining our R&D server on Discord, as well as send us your voice messages through Anchor. And so I hope you have a wonderful day, and schedule another appointment with your FEHologist real soon. Take care.